Adding to our discussion now, Malcolm Nance, an MSNBC counterterrorism and intelligence analyst, and Ruth Marcus, deputy editorial page editor and columnist at The Washington Post and an MSNBC contributor. And Malcolm, your reaction to the story as it's developed at this point?
I have two different reactions to this story. The first one is the technical intelligence that the Turks have demonstrated, if this story is true, if there are audio recordings, means that the Turks have had all of these embassies and consulates wired for some time. I mean, to go into the bowels of that building and to get audio or, audio recordings of a murder means that they know everything that's going on in that building, and they're very confident about how it's done. The second part is a little more disturbing. The chain of information that we've seen reported from the Post about U.S. intelligence knowing, having information about the Saudis' participation in this or issuing orders on this, we have a system set up so that the President of the United States is informed of critical flash traffic like that within 5 minutes, which means the President would have had to have known about the outlet of this plot and the murder almost instantaneously.
Ruth Marcus, your reaction to what President Trump had to say both about Saudi Arabia and the Khashoggi case today?
Well, my reaction has to be colored by this terrible news that my colleague Shane has reported and by the fact that I represent the opinion section of the Washington Post that employed Jamal Khashoggi, and we're all I'm struggling for the adjectives to convey our horror at these reports and our heartbreak for him and his family. And I have to say, all of those emotions are exacerbated and many times over by the notion that the President of the United States, speaking about someone who lived in the United States, someone who worked for a U.S. newspaper, someone who was doing his job, which was to tell the truth as he understood it about the country that he loved, that the president would describe our relations with Saudi Arabia as excellent, and that the president would talk about these relations in dollar terms and not in humanity and human rights terms.
And Shane Harris, what do you think of the available avenues for you to be pursuing on this story as it's developing?
Well, I think there's a big question still here about, to coin the old phrase, use the old phrase, what did the president know and when did he know it? Our previous reporting in the paper this week showed that there were intercepts that the United States had of Saudi officials discussing a separate effort to lure Jamal Khashoggi back to Saudi Arabia, where he would be detained. And there has been some speculation among our sources that perhaps what transpired at the consulate was sort of a plan B, if you will. Efforts to get him to come back under his own will to Saudi Arabia failed. So if there was information about potential threats to Jamal Khashoggi before he ever went into that consulate, the question then becomes who knew about that in the government, and was that ever presented to the president? And as Malcolm said, there are mechanisms to elevate intelligence from the bottom up to the president when people feel that he needs to know it, and those are questions that we'd like to try to answer.
Malcolm Nance, when the president talks about the $110 billion that Saudi Arabia wants to spend on American systems, what he's talking about is a big list of things that were developed during the Obama administration. President Obama was willing to approve $115 billion in acquisitions by Saudi Arabia, but they couldn't afford it. They only were able to obtain about half of that at the time, and none of the things on this list are new. The president seems to think that the United States is in a desperate vendor relationship with Saudi Arabia, and we desperately need them to buy this material because they will immediately go to the Chinese or someone else.
Well, that was a very unfortunate statement that the president made about compromising potentially $110 billion of arms sales over this issue of Khashoggi, which tells the Saudis what Donald Trump's price is to buy is silence. Those sales are not real. They are projections. They are wish lists and fantasies. The Obama administration last sale was $25 billion. And I think Donald Trump, watching the news that Pakistan recently made a large arms sale from China and that India made a missile sale from Russia, that he sees this as some sort of arms bazaar, which is what we've always dominated in the Middle East, but that's his #1 priority, not the defense of U.S. residents or citizens, and perhaps not even the defense of democracy himself, because he told the Saudis he was not going to be getting involved in their business anymore. And I'm sure that was new. That was news to their ears and something that they would be pleased by.
And Ruth Marcus, of course, there are suspicions about the Saudi relationship to the president financially, to the president's son-in-law financially, on their personal finances.
There are, but I think this needs to go beyond actually looking just at the Trump family or the Trump organization's relationship with the Saudis. And we're going to need to look, as we discover the facts here, as we seek to hold people accountable, we're going to need to look at Saudi influence and the tentacles of Saudi money that go beyond the Trump family, that extend to the extensive lobbyists on the Saudi payroll, to the think tanks in Washington that take Saudi money, to the foreign agents that represent the Saudi government. And we're going to have to ask everybody who, if all of these terrible reports turn out to be true, if the Saudi government was involved at the highest levels, we're going to just have to ask everybody who works for them, who takes money from them, who is on their payroll, whose side are you on? What are you doing? Where is your humanity and belief in human rights and a free press? And so, yes, let's look at the relationships between the Trump organization and the Saudi government, but let's not stop there.
Ruth Marcus, thanks for starting our conversation tonight. Malcolm Nance, thank you. And Shane Harris, thank you for your invaluable reporting and getting us started tonight. Really appreciate it.